Good morning, everyone. All right, let's see what Micah has for us. So let's look at Micah chapter 3. So we'll begin from verse 1. And I said, Hear, I pray you, O heads of Jacob, and ye princes of the house of Israel. Is it not for you to know judgment? Micah is not primarily speaking about political leaders thousands of years ago. He is speaking about the governing faculties within consciousness. The heads of Jacob represent the thoughts, beliefs, and ruling ideas that govern a person's life. The princes of Israel represent the higher faculties that are supposed to administer wisdom, discernment, and truth. Remember, if the kingdom is within, then the government is within. If the temple is within, then the priests are within. If Israel is within, then the rulers of Israel are within. Micah begins by asking a profound question. Is it not for you to know judgment? In other words, shouldn't the governing part of your consciousness know the difference between truth and illusion? Shouldn't the part of you making decisions possess discernment? Shouldn't the ruler within know what is beneficial and what is destructive? This is the same principle Jesus later teaches. By their fruits ye shall know them. True judgment is not condemnation. True judgment is discernment, the ability to recognize what produces life, what produces suffering, what produces clarity, and what produces confusion. Everyday example. Imagine someone continually enters toxic relationships. The warning signs are obvious. The patterns are obvious. The red flags are obvious. Yet each time, they ignore discernment and follow impulse. The issue is not lack of information. The issue is that the ruler within has stopped exercising judgment. The governing faculty is asleep. Another example. A person repeatedly spends beyond their means. They ignore budgets, ignore consequences, ignore advice, then become shocked when crisis arrives. The problem is not the economy. The problem is that the inner ruler has abandoned discernment. The prince within is no longer governing. Spiritual example. Someone follows every preacher they see online. 1 week, they believe one doctrine. The next week, the opposite. The next week, something else entirely. No examination. No discernment. No testing. No inner knowing. Micah's question becomes, is it not for you to know judgment? Shouldn't the governing part of your consciousness learn to distinguish truth from deception? Christ consciousness is awakened discernment. It is the restoration of proper government within. This is why Isaiah says, the government shall be upon his shoulder. Not political government, inner government. The restoration of divine order within consciousness. Micah is exposing what happens when the rulers within stop governing through wisdom. When discernment falls asleep, the kingdom becomes chaotic. And the rest of Micah 3 will show the consequences of leadership, both outward and inward, that has become disconnected from truth. Micah 3:1 is therefore a call to awaken the governing faculty within and restore discernment as the ruler of consciousness. Next verse. Who hates the good and love the evil? Who pluck off their skin from off them and their flesh from off their bones? At first glance, this sounds shocking. It sounds like Micah is describing violent people, literally tearing flesh from human beings. But throughout the prophets, physical imagery is often used to describe spiritual and psychological realities. Flesh often symbolizes the outer man. Skin symbolizes covering or appearance. Bones symbolize structure, strength, and foundational support. Good and evil represent alignment and misalignment with truth. Micah is exposing rulers who have become so disconnected from truth that they no longer recognize what produces life. Who hates the good and love the evil? This does not necessarily mean they consciously wake up saying, I want evil today. It means their values have become inverted. They call beneficial things harmful. They call harmful things beneficial. This mirrors what Isaiah later says. Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil. When awareness becomes distorted, a person begins attacking the very thing that could heal them while defending the thing that keeps them trapped. Relationship example. A person meets someone honest, faithful, communicative, and emotionally healthy. Instead of appreciating these qualities, they find them boring. Meanwhile, they are attracted to chaos, manipulation, inconsistency, and drama. They reject what is good and embrace what harms them. The ruler within has become confused. Career example. Someone knows discipline, learning, consistency, and accountability will help them grow. Yet they constantly choose procrastination, excuses, shortcuts, and avoidance. They resist the very habits that would elevate their life. They love what weakens them and hate what strengthens them. Spiritual example. Someone values being right more than discovering truth. When new understanding appears, they attack it immediately. not because it is false, but because it strengthens familiar beliefs. Truth becomes the enemy. Comfort becomes the idol. The good is hated. The illusion is loved. Next, who pluck off their skin from off them? Skin is a covering. Symbolically, this can represent stripping away dignity, protection, or healthy boundaries. These rulers exploit others for personal gain. They remove what protects people, not physically, psychologically, emotionally, socially, and spiritually. Example, a leader deliberately uses fear to control people. A corporation intentionally manipulates vulnerable consumers. A religious teacher weaponizes guilt to maintain power. They strip away confidence, strip away freedom, strip away discernment. They remove the protective covering of those they influence. Next, and their flesh from off their bones. Bones are structure, foundation, support. Flesh gives expression to that structure. Micah is describing leaders who consume the very people they are supposed to serve. Instead of strengthening others, they drain them. Instead of building people up, they extract from them. Modern parallel. A person enters a relationship where one partner continually takes. They take emotional energy, financial resources, time, and support while giving almost nothing in return. Eventually, the other person feels exhausted, depleted, and empty. Their very structure feels weakened. That is the imagery Micah is using. Christ consciousness perspective. Christ consciousness always gives life. It builds, strengthens, restores, nourishes, and protects. The false ruler within does the opposite. It feeds on fear, feeds on insecurity, feeds on ego, feeds on control. Micah is exposing a state of consciousness where the governing faculties no longer serve life but consume it. The question becomes, what is ruling within me? Is my inner government strengthening my life? Or is it feeding upon the very things that were meant to help me grow? Micah is showing that when discernment is lost, the ruler becomes a predator instead of a servant. And both individuals and societies suffer as a result. Verse 3 will intensify this same imagery and reveal the full extent of the exploitation Micah is exposing. Verse 3, who also eats the flesh of my people and flay their skin from off them, and they break their bones and chop them in pieces, as for the pot, and as flesh within the cauldron. This is one of the most graphic images in the entire book. If read literally, it sounds like cannibalism. To eat is to internalize, absorb, consume, become one with, or derive sustenance from something. Throughout scripture, eating is frequently symbolic. Jesus says, "Except ye eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood." No one understood him literally because he was speaking about internalization, taking on the nature, absorbing the life, becoming one with the reality being presented. Micah uses the opposite image. Instead of leaders feeding people truth, they are feeding on the people themselves. Next, who also eats the flesh of my people? These rulers derive their power, status, wealth, and influence by consuming the lives of others. They survive by extraction. They take more than they give. Rather than serving the people, they feed on them. Political example. A leader enters office, promising development, promising schools, promising hospitals, promising infrastructure, promising opportunity. Instead, public resources become private wealth. The people remain poor. The communities remain undeveloped. The leader becomes richer. Micah would call this eating the flesh of the people. Not literally, but living off the life that should have been used to strengthen the community. This is very close to what many people criticize when discussing corrupt governments, including situations where public funds are embezzled while citizens continue to suffer. Corporate example. A company knowingly underpays workers, overworks them, removes benefits, creates unsafe conditions, all while executives enrich themselves. The people generating the value are being consumed by the system. Religious example. A spiritual leader constantly demands loyalty, money, attention, and service. Everything flows upward. Very little flows back into the growth and freedom of the people. Members become exhausted, dependent, fearful, and unable to think for themselves. The system is feeding on them rather than feeding them. Next, flay their skin from off them. Skin represents protection and covering. When people are manipulated, controlled, or exploited, their sense of security is stripped away. Confidence is stripped away. Freedom is stripped away. Discernment is stripped away. The protective layer is removed. Next, they break their bones. Bones symbolize structure, foundation, strength, and support. To break someone's bones symbolically is to destroy the structures that support their flourishing. Relationship example. An emotionally controlling partner slowly destroys confidence, self-worth, independence, and identity. The person becomes a shadow of who they once were. Their inner structure has been broken. Next, and chop them in pieces as for the pot. The image becomes even stronger. The people are no longer viewed as human beings. They become resources, objects, tools, means to an end. They are reduced to what can be extracted from them. This is exactly what happens whenever people are treated as votes instead of humans, customers instead of humans, workers instead of humans, followers instead of humans, sources of income instead of humans. Micah is exposing dehumanization. Christ consciousness perspective. Christ consciousness does not consume people. It nourishes people. It strengthens people. It restores people. It empowers people. Jesus embodies this principle when he says, I am come that they might have life and that they might have it more abundantly. The false ruler extracts life. The Christ consciousness imparts life. So Micah 3:3 is not about cannibalism. It is about systems, leaders, beliefs, and even inner patterns that survive by draining life from others rather than contributing life to others. The prophet is exposing every form of leadership, external and internal, that feeds on people instead of serving them. And having exposed the corruption, Micah is about to reveal the consequence in the next verse. What happens when those who refuse to hear the cries of others suddenly find themselves crying out for help? Verse 4, then shall they cry unto the Lord, but he will not hear them. He will even hide his face from them at that time, as they have behaved themselves ill in their doings. This is one of those verses that can sound harsh if read literally. At first glance, it appears that God is refusing to listen. But if God is truth, life, light, and the source dwelling within, then we must ask, what does it mean for the Lord to not hear? Remember that throughout Scripture, God often speaks through the language of human experience. The prophets describe what it feels like when a person becomes disconnected from truth. Then shall they cry unto the Lord. Notice the sequence. While they possess power, influence, and control, they ignore the suffering they caused. Now the consequences of their actions have returned. Now they seek help. Now they seek wisdom. Now they seek rescue. This is not God becoming angry. This is cause and effect revealing itself. Everyday example. Someone ignores their health for years. Poor diet, no exercise, constant stress, no rest, no balance. Then a serious illness appears. Suddenly, they begin praying for healing. The issue is not that God stopped listening. The issue is that reality has consequences. The harvest follows the seed. Relationship example. A person repeatedly lies, manipulates, and betrays trust. Their partner warns them many times. Friends warn them. Family warns them. They ignore every warning. Eventually, the relationship collapses. Now they desperately want restoration. The pain is real, but the consequences are the natural result of what was planted. Career example. An employee consistently avoids responsibility, misses deadlines, ignores feedback, rejects correction. Eventually, they lose the position. Now they urgently seek opportunities that were available before. The issue is not punishment. The issue is accumulated consequences. Next, but he will not hear them. This means they have become unable to perceive the guidance that was always available. The voice of wisdom never disappeared. Their ability to hear it became clouded. When consciousness becomes dominated by ego, greed, fear, pride, or selfishness, discernment grows weaker. The signal is still present. The receiver becomes distorted. This mirrors many sayings of Jesus. He that had ears to hear, let him hear. The problem was never the absence of truth. The problem was the inability to receive it. He will even hide his face from them. The face throughout scripture often symbolizes presence, awareness, and perception. To seek the face of God is to seek awareness of truth. To see God's face symbolically is to perceive reality clearly. When Micah says God hides his face, the deeper meaning is that truth becomes obscured from those who continually reject it. Not because truth left, but because distortion has covered perception. Example, think of someone caught in addiction. Family members may see the distraction clearly. Friends may see it clearly. Everyone around them sees what is happening. Yet the person themselves cannot. Reality seems hidden from them. The truth has not disappeared. Their perception has become clouded. The law written within. This connects beautifully with I will write my laws in their hearts. The law is already present. Conscience is already present. Discernment is already present. Wisdom is already present. But if someone repeatedly ignores that inner guidance, eventually they become less sensitive to it. Not because God abandoned them, but because they stopped listening. Christ consciousness perspective. Christ consciousness restores hearing. restores sight, restores perception. This is why Jesus continually heals blind eyes, deaf ears, crippled limbs. On the inner level, these miracles symbolize restoration of awareness, the ability to perceive truth again, the ability to hear wisdom again, the ability to walk in alignment again. Micah is describing the opposite condition. A consciousness that has become so committed to self-interest that it can no longer hear the guidance that once spoke clearly within. The deeper principle. The universe is not structured around punishment. It is structured around alignment. When we move into harmony with truth, clarity increases. When we move away from truth, confusion increases. Micah is describing what confusion feels like after years of ignoring wisdom. The cry for help is sincere, but the ability to perceive the answer has become obscured by the very patterns that created the problem. The good news is that the prophets never stop at exposure. Exposure is always the first step toward restoration. And now Micah begins turning his attention toward another group contributing to the confusion. The prophet who speak not what is true, but what people want to hear. Verse 5. Thus saith the Lord, concerning the prophets that make my people err, that bite with their teeth and cry peace, and he that putteth not into their mouths, they even prepare war against him. Micah now shifts from corrupt rulers to corrupt prophets. If the rulers represent governing faculties, then the prophets represent the voices that influence consciousness. A prophet symbolizes that which speaks into awareness, the ideas we listen to, the messages we absorb, the voices we trust, the beliefs that shape perception. The question becomes, what happens when the voices guiding people are themselves distorted? The prophets that make my people err. Notice something important. Micah does not say the people deliberately chose error. He says they were led into it. This is why discernment is so important. Not every confident voice is a truthful voice. Not every popular voice is a wise voice. Not every spiritual voice is an awakened voice. A person can sincerely follow guidance and still end up lost if the guide is lost. Jesus later says, if the blind lead the blind, both shall fall into the ditch. The issue is not sincerity. The issue is discernment. Next, that bite with their teeth. To eat is to internalize. Teeth are what break things down for consumption. Symbolically, Micah is describing people who use their words to consume, exploit, and profit from others. Their message is not designed to liberate. It is designed to feed them. Example: a person discovers that fear attracts attention. Outrage generates clicks. Division creates engagement. So they continually produce content that keeps people afraid, angry, and dependent. The audience is being consumed. The prophet is feeding on the people. Religious example: a teacher realizes that fear of judgment brings donations. Fear of curses brings loyalty. Fear of being excluded brings compliance. So fear becomes the message, not because it is true, but because it is profitable. The people are not being fed, the people are being eaten. And cry peace. Micah exposes another extreme. These prophets tell people exactly what they want to hear. As long as benefits are flowing toward them, everything is wonderful. Everything is blessed. Everything is peaceful. Everything is fine. No correction. No challenge. No truth. Only comfort. Relationship example: imagine a friend who never tells you the truth. Every destructive decision you make is applauded. Every red flag is ignored. Every mistake is justified. You may feel supported, but you are actually being harmed. True love sometimes confronts. True wisdom sometimes corrects. Career example: a manager sees serious problems developing in a company. But because speaking up might threaten their position, they remain silent. Everyone keeps saying everything is fine until the collapse comes. The false peace was more dangerous than the problem itself. And he that putteth not into their mouths. Now Micah reveals the motive. As long as people provide what these prophets desire, they receive favorable messages. Approval is for sale. Blessings are for sale. Encouragement is for sale. Truth has become transactional. Next, they even prepare war against him. The moment someone refuses to participate, the message changes. Now the same person who was praised becomes condemned. Now peace becomes war. Acceptance becomes rejection. Not because truth changed, because the benefit changed. Spiritual example: someone follows a teacher for years. They agree with everything, support everything, promote everything. Then they ask a sincere question, or they disagree respectfully. Suddenly, they are treated as enemies. Nothing actually changed except the willingness to conform. Micah is exposing how easily ego can disguise itself as spiritual authority. Christ consciousness perspective. Christ consciousness cannot be bought. It cannot be bribed. It cannot be manipulated. It does not tell people what they want to hear. It reveals what they need to hear. This is why Jesus sometimes comforted people and sometimes challenged people, sometimes encouraged, sometimes corrected. The goal was never approval. The goal was awakening. Micah is exposing voices that have abandoned awakening and replaced it with self-interest. The message is no longer serving truth. The message is serving appetite. The deeper principle. Every one of us has inner prophets, inner voices, inner narratives, inner interpretations. The question Micah places before us is, which voices are we listening to? The voice that comforts our illusions, or the voice that awakens us to truth? Because one leads to temporary comfort and eventual confusion. The other may challenge us initially, but ultimately leads to freedom. And in the next verse, Micah reveals what happens when those voices become completely disconnected from the light of truth. The symbolic meaning of darkness falling upon the prophets. Verse 6, therefore night shall be unto you, that ye shall not have a vision, and it shall be dark unto you, that ye shall not divine, and the sun shall go down over the prophets, and the day shall be dark over them. Micah now describes the consequence of continually choosing self-interest over truth. Notice that the punishment is not fire from heaven. It is not distraction from outside. It is darkness. And throughout scripture, darkness is one of the most consistent symbols for ignorance, confusion, and lack of awareness. Light represents understanding. Darkness represents misunderstanding. Light represents truth. Darkness represents illusion. This is why John says, God is light, and in him is no darkness at all. And why Jesus says, I am the light of the world. The issue is not physical light. The issue is consciousness. Night shall be unto you. Night is a state where vision becomes limited. Things that were obvious become difficult to see. Direction becomes unclear. The path becomes uncertain. Micah is describing a consciousness that has become disconnected from discernment. The very people who claim to guide others can no longer see clearly themselves. Relationship example. Someone ignores red flags for years. They repeatedly justify unhealthy behavior. Eventually, they lose the ability to recognize what a healthy relationship even looks like. Their discernment becomes clouded. Night has fallen upon their perception. Career example. A company becomes obsessed with short-term profit. Every decision is made for immediate gain. Warnings are ignored. Risks are ignored. Ethics are ignored. Eventually, leadership loses the ability to see where the organization is heading. They become blind to the consequences of their own decisions. Spiritual example. A person becomes more interested in defending beliefs than discovering truth. Over time, they stop questioning, stop examining, stop growing. Their doctrine becomes fixed, while their awareness becomes stagnant. They may still speak confidently, but inwardly, vision has diminished. That he shall not have a vision. Vision symbolizes insight, clarity, understanding, the ability to perceive reality beyond appearances. Micah is saying that when truth is continually sacrificed for personal gain, insight begins to disappear. This is not God withholding wisdom. It is the natural consequence of becoming attached to illusion. Next, it shall be dark unto you that you shall not divine. Divining here points to perceiving, discerning, or recognizing what is true. Micah is describing the loss of spiritual perception, the inability to distinguish truth from error, wisdom from foolishness, and reality from projection. This is exactly what happens when ego becomes the primary lens through which life is interpreted. Everything becomes distorted. Next, the sun shall go down over the prophets. The sun is one of Scripture's most powerful symbols of illumination, light, awareness, revelation, and understanding. When the sun goes down, illumination disappears. The prophet who once claimed to guide others now stands in the same darkness they helped create. Modern example. Imagine someone who constantly manipulates facts for personal benefit. At first, they know they are twisting reality. But after years of doing it, something changes. Eventually, they begin believing their own distortions. The deception that started as a tool becomes their reality. The sun has gone down. They no longer merely spread confusion, they now live within it. The inner meaning. Micah is not only speaking about false prophets out there. He is speaking about something that can happen within all of us. Whenever we repeatedly ignore truth, clarity decreases, awareness decreases, discernment decreases. Little by little, the inner light becomes obscured. This is why Jesus continually speaks of having eyes that see and ears that hear. Awareness must remain open. Truth must remain more important than comfort. Christ consciousness perspective. Christ consciousness is the rising of the inner sun, the restoration of vision, the restoration of sight, the restoration of awareness. This is why Paul says, "Awake thou that sleepest, and arise from the dead, and Christ shall give thee light." Notice the sequence: awaken, rise, receive light. Micah is describing the opposite process. ignore truth, defend illusion, exploit others, lose discernment, enter darkness. The deeper principle: every act of honesty increases light. Every act of self-deception increases darkness. Every time we choose truth over ego, the sun rises a little higher within consciousness. Every time we choose ego over truth, the light becomes a little dimmer. Micah is warning that no one, not even prophets, teachers, leaders, or spiritual authorities, is exempt from this principle. The moment truth becomes secondary to self-interest, night begins to fall. And in the next verse, Micah shows the result. The prophets become ashamed because the source of their confidence and supposed vision is exposed as empty. Next verse, then shall the seers be ashamed, and the diviners confounded. Yea, they shall all cover their lips, for there is no answer of God. Micah now reaches the inevitable outcome of false vision. When illusion is exposed by reality, shame follows. When distortion meets truth, confusion follows. When false certainty collides with what actually is, the mask begins to fall. Then shall the seers be ashamed. A seer is supposed to see. A seer is supposed to possess vision, insight, discernment, clarity. But Micah has already shown that darkness has fallen upon them. Now the consequence appears. The people who claim certainty discovered they were not seeing clearly at all. The embarrassment is not because God humiliated them. The embarrassment comes because reality exposed the illusion. Everyday example. Have you ever been absolutely certain about something? You argued passionately, defended it strongly, maybe even criticized others for disagreeing, then later discovered you were wrong. The shame does not come from punishment. The shame comes from realizing how confidently you defended an illusion. That is the experience Micah is describing. Relationship example. Someone becomes convinced that a faithful partner is untrustworthy. They accuse, they suspect, they create stories in their mind. Months later, they discover the accusations were completely false. Now they must face what their distorted perception created. The seer becomes ashamed. Spiritual example. A teacher spends years declaring, this is the only truth. Everyone else is deceived. Only we are right. Then deeper understanding arrives. Or contradictions become obvious. Or reality challenges the assumptions. Now the certainty begins to crumble. The seer becomes ashamed. And the diviners confounded. To be confounded means to become confused, bewildered, unable to make sense of things. The very people who claim to possess answers suddenly find themselves without them. Their old framework no longer works. Their old certainty no longer works. Their old explanations no longer work. The structures they depended upon begin collapsing. This happens during awakening. One of the most uncomfortable parts of awakening is the collapse of certainty. Many people think awakening is gaining answers. Often, it begins with losing false answers. Before clarity comes, confusion often comes first. Before the new structure emerges, the old structure falls apart. Micah is describing that moment. They shall all cover their lips. This is powerful symbolism. The mouth represents speaking, teaching, declaring, proclaiming. Covering the lips symbolizes the end of confident declarations. The person who once spoke endlessly suddenly becomes silent. Why? Because they realize they do not know as much as they thought. Modern example. Have you ever met someone who always had an answer for everything? Then life humbled them. Suddenly, they became more thoughtful, more reflective, more willing to listen, less interested in proving, more interested in learning. Sometimes, silence is the beginning of wisdom. Next, for there is no answer of God. This statement can sound frightening if read literally. If God is truth, then this means they are no longer connected to truth. Not because truth disappeared, not because God abandoned them, but because their own distortions have blocked their perception. The answer is present. The receiver is malfunctioning. Imagine a radio station broadcasting continuously. The signal is always there. But if the receiver is damaged or tuned incorrectly, all you hear is static. The problem is not the broadcast. The problem is the reception. Micah is describing a consciousness that has lost alignment with the signal. Christ consciousness perspective. Christ consciousness is radical honesty. It is the willingness to let illusion die. The willingness to admit, I was wrong. I misunderstood. I need deeper clarity. I have more to learn. Ironically, this humility restores vision. The moment certainty loosens its grip, truth can enter. This is why Jesus continually challenged those who believed they already saw. He often had the hardest conversations with those most certain of their own righteousness. The deeper principle. Micah is revealing a universal law of consciousness. When ego claims certainty, growth stops. When humility admits limitation, growth begins. The false prophet within us always says, I already know. The Christ consciousness within us says, show me what is true. One closes the door, the other opens it. Micah is exposing the collapse of false certainty so that genuine wisdom can emerge. And in the next verse, Micah contrasts himself with these prophets. Instead of speaking from self-interest, he describes what it means to be filled with power, judgment, and strength, the qualities of a consciousness aligned with truth rather than ego. Verse 8, but truly I am full of power by the Spirit of the Lord, and of judgment, and of might, to declare unto Jacob his transgression, and to Israel his sin. After exposing corrupt rulers, false prophets, distorted vision, and spiritual darkness, Micah now presents a contrast. Notice that he does not say, I am powerful because I am special. He does not say, I am powerful because I hold a title. He does not say, I am powerful because people follow me. The source of the power is identified immediately by the Spirit of the Lord. The Spirit of the Lord is the movement of truth, wisdom, and divine awareness within consciousness. Micah is describing what happens when a person becomes aligned with truth rather than ego. I am full of power. Power here is not domination. It is not control. It is not the ability to force others. True spiritual power is the ability to remain aligned with truth, even when truth is uncomfortable. Many people can repeat popular opinions. Few people can stand in truth when it challenges the crowd. That is the power Micah is describing. Example, suppose everyone in a workplace knows something unethical is happening. Everyone sees it. Everyone talks about it privately, but nobody says anything publicly. Then one person speaks, not out of anger, not out of ego, but because truth matters more than comfort. That takes power. Relationship example. Someone realizes a relationship is unhealthy. They have ignored the signs for years. Everyone around them sees it. They see it too, but they are afraid to face it. Then one day, they become honest with themselves. That honesty requires power. Truth often requires more strength than denial. And of judgment, not condemnation, discernment. The ability to distinguish between truth and illusion, life and death, alignment and misalignment. Micah is saying, I can see clearly, not because he is superior, but because he is aligned. This mirrors Jesus. Jesus constantly demonstrated judgment in this sense. He saw beneath appearances. He saw beneath titles. He saw beneath religious performances. He saw the inner reality. This is discernment. This is judgment. And of might. Might is steadfastness, the ability to remain grounded. Many people discover truth, Few people remain loyal to it when pressure arrives. Might is spiritual stability, the ability to stay centered when challenged, to declare unto Jacob his transgression. Now we reach an important point. Micah is not speaking truth to condemn. He is speaking truth to reveal. Healing begins with awareness. Transformation begins with awareness. You cannot correct what you refuse to see. The mirror principle. Imagine looking into a mirror. The mirror is not attacking you. It is simply showing what is present. Micah's role is similar. The prophet is a mirror. Truth reflects reality. And to Israel his sin. Jacob often represents the evolving self, the consciousness still wrestling with truth. Israel represents awakened consciousness after transformation. Notice something fascinating. Both Jacob and Israel still require correction. Why? Because awakening is not a destination. It is a continual process of refinement. The meaning of sin here. Sin is not primarily about breaking arbitrary rules. The root idea is missing the mark, being out of alignment, living beneath what is possible. Micah reveals misalignment, so alignment can be restored. Example. Suppose someone spends years believing their worth comes from money. Their identity comes from status. Their value comes from approval. Then one day, truth reveals the illusion. At first, the revelation feels uncomfortable. But that discomfort becomes the doorway to freedom. The exposure is not punishment, it is liberation. Christ consciousness perspective. Christ consciousness never exposes in order to shame. It exposes in order to heal. Just as a physician identifies a wound before treating it, just as a teacher identifies misunderstanding before correcting it, just as light reveals what darkness concealed. This is why Jesus often began transformation by revealing what was hidden, not to condemn people, but to free them. The deeper principle. False prophets tell people what they want to hear. True prophets reveal what they need to see. False prophets protect comfort. True prophets serve awakening. False prophets avoid tension. True prophets are willing to confront illusion. Micah is saying, the spirit of truth gives me the strength to reveal what needs to be seen. And that is the mark of authentic spiritual leadership. Not the ability to gather followers, but the willingness to remain aligned with truth, even when truth is unpopular. The next verses will return directly to the rulers, priests, and prophets of Israel and expose how all three forms of leadership became corrupted by self-interest rather than service. Verse 9. Hear this, I pray you, ye heads of the house of Jacob, and princes of the house of Israel, that abhor judgment and pervert all equity. Micah now returns to the rulers. But notice how the accusation has become even more specific. Earlier he said, is it not for you to know judgment? Now he says, you abhor judgment. In other words, the problem is no longer ignorance. The problem is resistance. They do not merely fail to recognize truth, they actively reject it. Ye heads of the house of Jacob. The heads represent the governing faculties within consciousness, the thoughts, beliefs, and ruling assumptions that direct the course of life. If the kingdom is within, then leadership is within. If the temple is within, then administration is within. Micah is speaking to the part of consciousness responsible for governing experience. And princes of the house of Israel. Princes symbolize those faculties entrusted with stewardship, leadership, administration, responsibility. These are the aspects of consciousness that should maintain order, balance, and alignment. Yet Micah says they have become corrupted. That abhor judgment. Judgment does not primarily mean condemnation. It means discernment, the ability to see clearly, to distinguish truth from illusion, wisdom from folly, alignment from misalignment. To abhor judgment means to resist clarity, to resist self-examination, to resist correction, to resist truth. Have you ever seen someone ask for advice, but become defensive every time advice is given? They claim to want answers, but what they really want is validation. They want agreement, not insight. They want comfort, not transformation. That is what Micah is describing, the rejection of discernment. Relationship example. A person keeps entering the same unhealthy relationship pattern. Friends point it out. Family points it out. Experience points it out. Yet they refuse to examine the pattern. Why? Because true discernment would require change. And change is uncomfortable. The issue is no longer lack of knowledge. The issue is resistance to knowledge. Spiritual example. Someone encounters information that challenges a long-held belief. Instead of examining it honestly, they immediately reject it. Not because it is false, but because it threatens identity. Micah will call this abhorring judgment. Not because discernment is unavailable, because discernment is unwelcome. And pervert all equity. Equity here refers to fairness, balance, straightness, and proper order. Micah is describing something becoming crooked that should be straight, distorted that should be clear, and twisted that should be balanced. The crooked ruler within. When consciousness becomes dominated by ego, something interesting happens. Everything becomes distorted. We excuse our own behavior while condemning others. We justify what benefits us while criticizing the same behavior in others. We create double standards. The ruler within becomes crooked. Modern example. A politician condemns corruption when opponents do it, but excuses corruption when allies do it. The standard changes based on self-interest. That is perverted equity. Relationship example. Someone expects honesty from their partner, yet they themselves are dishonest. They expect loyalty, yet they themselves are disloyal. The scales are no longer balanced. Equity has been distorted. Religious example. Someone quotes scripture to judge others, yet ignores the very principles they are using against someone else. For example, someone condemns tattoos using one verse from Leviticus 19 while ignoring the many surrounding laws in the same chapter. You are condemning people with tattoos, yet you trim your beard, yet you wear clothes from mixed fabrics. You can't cherry pick verses. The standard becomes selective. The principle becomes distorted. Micah will call this a perversion of equity. Christ consciousness perspective. Christ consciousness restores balance, restores honesty, restores integrity. It applies the same standard inwardly that it applies outwardly. This is why Jesus continually addressed hypocrisy, not because he hated people, but because hypocrisy is a distortion of equity. It creates one standard for self and another for everyone else. The deeper principle. Micah is exposing an universal tendency of the ego. The ego loves conclusions but hates examination. It loves being right. It hates being corrected. It loves judging others. It hates being judged by the same standard. The Christ within does the opposite. It welcomes truth wherever it appears, even when that truth is uncomfortable, even when it exposes blind spots, even when it requires transformation. Micah is showing that the real crisis is not external corruption alone. The real crisis begins when the governing faculties of consciousness stop loving truth and start protecting self-interest. And in the next verse, Micah reveals the inevitable result: a society and an inner life being built with blood, exploitation and misalignment rather than truth and wisdom. Verse 10, they build up Zion with blood and Jerusalem with iniquity. At first glance, it sounds like Micah is accusing leaders of literally building cities through violence. While that may have had an outward application in his day, the deeper principle is much broader and timeless. The question Micah is asking is, what are you building your life upon? And equally important, what is the cost of the thing you are building? They build up Zion. Zion represents an elevated state of consciousness, a higher awareness, a place of spiritual alignment, a place where truth reigns. Jerusalem often symbolizes the inner city of peace, the ordered consciousness, the awakened mind. So Micah is exposing a contradiction. People claim to be building something sacred, something spiritual, something noble, but the foundation itself is corrupt. The appearance of Zion. This is important. Outwardly, it may look impressive. The building stands. The city appears successful. The ministry grows. The company grows. The reputation grows. The platform grows. But Micah is concerned with the foundation because appearances can be deceiving. With blood. Blood symbolizes life. Blood is life force, energy, vitality, what sustains existence. To build with blood is to build something using the life of others as the fuel. Relationship example. A person sacrifices their identity, dreams, purpose, and emotional well-being trying to maintain a relationship. The relationship survives, but it survives at the expense of someone's life force. The structure was built with blood. Family example. Sometimes parents sacrifice everything for their children. Sacrifice is not inherently wrong, but when a parent completely abandons their own health, growth, identity, and purpose, eventually resentment develops. The family structure was sustained by draining the life of one person. Micah invites us to question whether that foundation is healthy. Career example. Someone builds a successful career. The promotions come. The money comes. The status comes. But along the way, their health collapses. Relationships collapse. Peace disappears. Joy disappears. Outward success exists, but it was purchased with blood. The structure was built by consuming life rather than enhancing it. Spiritual example. A ministry becomes large. The organization grows. The influence expands, but fear is used. Manipulation is used. Guilt is used. Control is used. People are emotionally exhausted. The building appears spiritual, yet Micah says it is built with blood. And Jerusalem with iniquity. Iniquity symbolizes distortion, crookedness, misalignment, a departure from truth. Jerusalem symbolizes peace, the inner city of harmony, the consciousness ordered around truth. Micah's accusation is devastating. They are trying to create peace using methods that destroy peace. They are trying to create righteousness using unrighteous means. They are trying to build truth upon distortion. Modern example. Someone constantly lies to preserve a relationship. The goal is peace, but the method destroys peace. The very thing being used to preserve the culture eventually undermines it. Another example. A government claims to create prosperity. Yet corruption becomes the method. Eventually, the corruption destroys the prosperity it claimed to create. The foundation itself becomes the problem. The universal principle. Micah is revealing something timeless. You cannot build a healthy structure with unhealthy materials. You cannot build peace from deception. You cannot build trust from manipulation. You cannot build love from control. You cannot build freedom from fear. Eventually, the foundation reveals itself. This mirrors Jesus. Jesus says, a good tree cannot bring forth evil fruit, and by their fruits ye shall know them. The fruit always reveals the root. The outcome always reveals the foundation. Micah is asking us to examine the root. Christ consciousness perspective. Christ consciousness never builds through extraction. It builds through life, through truth, through alignment, through integrity, through love. Whatever Christ builds increases life. Whatever ego builds often consumes life. One nourishes, the other extracts. One liberates, the other enslaves. The deeper inner meaning. Micah is not merely criticizing ancient rulers. He is asking a question every awakened person must eventually face. What am I building my life upon? Am I building from fear, from approval, from ego, from control, from survival, or am I building from truth? Because no matter how beautiful the structure appears, the foundation eventually becomes visible. And in the next verse, Micah exposes the three major forms of corruption working together. Rulers who judge for reward, priests who teach for payment, prophets who prophesy for money, all claiming to serve God while serving self-interest. Verse 11, the heads thereof judge for reward, and the priests thereof teach for hire, and the prophet thereof divine for money. Yet will they lean upon the Lord and say, is not the Lord among us? None evil can come upon us. Micah now exposes the heart of the problem. The issue is not leadership itself. The issue is motivation. The rulers, priests, and prophets are also functioning. The system is still operating. The titles remain. The positions remain. The ceremonies remain. The language remains, but the center has shifted. Truth is no longer the goal. Self-interest has become the goal. The three pillars. Micah identifies three groups. Heads, which are rulers, the governing authority, those responsible for decisions. Priests, those responsible for teaching, guidance, instruction, formation. Prophets, those responsible for vision, insight, direction. Together, they represent the major influences shaping consciousness. Government, education, vision, leadership. Micah says all three have become corrupted by the same thing. The heads thereof judge for reward. They no longer make decisions because they are right. They make decisions because they are profitable. The standard becomes, what do I gain? Rather than what is true. Modern example. A politician knows the correct course of action, but chooses the popular course because it increases votes. Truth becomes secondary to reward. Everyday example. A manager promotes a friend rather than the most qualified person. Their decision is no longer based on merit. It is based on personal benefit. Judgment has been sold. The priests thereof teach for hire. Teaching itself is not the problem. People deserve compensation for their work. The issue is that compensation has become the master rather than the servant. The message changes to protect income. Truth becomes negotiable. Modern example. Someone avoids discussing important truths because they fear losing followers, fear losing customers, fear losing support. The message becomes shaped by profit rather than principle. Relationship example. A friend tells you what you want to hear because they want to remain liked, not because it helps you grow. Their guidance becomes driven by reward. The prophets thereof divine for money. Again, the issue is not money itself. The issue is allowing financial gain to determine what is proclaimed. The message becomes a product. Vision becomes a commodity. Truth becomes merchandise. Modern example. Someone discovers that fear generates more attention than wisdom. Outrage generates more engagement than nuance. So fear and outrage become the product. The audience receives what sells rather than what heals. Micah will recognize this immediately. Yet notice the most dangerous part. After exposing all this corruption, Micah says, yet would they lean upon the Lord. This is where the self-deception becomes complete. They still believe they are aligned. They still believe God approves. They still believe everything is fine. This is why self-examination matters. One of the most difficult things about consciousness is that people can convince themselves they are acting from truth when they are actually acting from ego. The ego rarely announces itself. It often disguises itself as righteousness, as certainty, as spiritual authority, as good intentions. It's not the Lord among us. Notice the confidence, not humility, not reflection, not self-examination, certainty. The assumption becomes, because we use God's name, we must be right. Because we are religious, we must be right. Because we hold authority, we must be right. Micah says that assumption itself is part of the blindness. This mirrors many biblical themes. Throughout scripture, the greatest conflicts rarely occur between believers and non-believers. They occur between genuine awakening and institutional certainty, between living truth and protected tradition, between transformation and self-preservation. This is why Jesus often challenged religious leaders more than anyone else. Not because leadership is bad, but because authority without self-examination easily becomes self-deception. The inner meaning. Remember that Micah is not only talking about leaders out there. He is also describing something within us. We all have inner rulers, inner priests, inner prophets. We all make decisions. We all teach ourselves narratives. We all create visions about reality. The question becomes, why? Do we seek truth or do we seek reward? Do we seek awakening or do we seek comfort? Do we seek reality or do we seek validation? Christ consciousness perspective. Christ consciousness cannot be purchased, cannot be bribed, cannot be manipulated. It remains aligned with truth regardless of the reward. This is why Jesus continually redirected attention away from titles, status, and appearances, and toward the condition of the heart. Because truth is not measured by popularity, not measured by profit, not measured by power. Truth is measured by alignment. The deeper principle. Micah reveals one of the greatest dangers in spiritual life. Being sincerely convinced you are aligned while actually serving self-interest. That is why humility remains essential. Because the moment we assume I cannot be wrong, we become vulnerable to the very blindness Micah is exposing. And in the final verse of the chapter, Micah reveals the inevitable consequence. When truth is abandoned, the city, the inner Jerusalem, the ordered consciousness eventually collapses. Not because God destroys it, but because a distorted foundation cannot sustain itself forever. Verse 12. Therefore shall Zion for your sake be plowed as a field, and Jerusalem shall become heaps, and the mountain of the house as the high places of the forest. This is the climax of the chapter. After exposing corrupt rulers, corrupt priests, corrupt prophets, distorted judgment, self-serving leadership, and spiritual blindness, Micah now reveals the consequence. But notice something important. The consequence is not eternal punishment. The consequence is dismantling. The false structure must be broken down so something true can be built. Zion shall be plowed as a field. This imagery is powerful. A farmer plows a field before planting. Plowing looks destructive. The ground is broken apart. The existing surface is overturned. Everything appears disrupted. Yet the purpose is not destruction. The purpose is preparation. This is exactly what happens during awakening. Many people think awakening is adding something new. Often, it begins with losing what was false. Beliefs collapse. Assumptions collapse. Identities collapse. Certainties collapse. The field is being plowed. That's what the story of Job is about. Job awakened. It was deconstruction. Everything that happened to Job was deconstruction. He was deconstructing from fear-based religion. Job awakened. Relationship example. Someone spends years believing, I need another person to complete me. Then life dismantles that belief. The relationship ends. The illusion breaks. The identity attached to it falls apart. At first, it feels devastating. Later, they realize the field was being prepared for something healthier. Career example. A person builds their entire identity around a job title. Then they lose the position. Everything they thought they were begins falling apart. It feels like distraction. Yet sometimes that collapse becomes the doorway to discovering who they truly are. The field is being plowed. Spiritual example. Many begin questioning teachings they once accepted without examination. Old frameworks collapse. Old assumptions collapse. At first, it feels unsettling, but eventually, clarity emerges. The plowing creates space for new growth. Jerusalem shall become heaps. Jerusalem symbolizes the inner city of peace, the order structure of consciousness. Micah says the city becomes heaps, piles, ruins. Again, this sounds negative until we understand the symbolism. Sometimes, what collapses is not peace itself, it is the false version of peace. False peace. Remember earlier in the chapter, the prophets cried, "Peace, peace," while everything underneath was corrupt. The appearance of peace remained. The reality of peace was absent. Micah says that false peace cannot survive forever. Eventually, reality exposes it. Everyday example. Someone avoids difficult conversations for years. Outwardly, everything seems peaceful. No conflict, no confrontation, no honesty. Then eventually, the relationship collapses. The false peace becomes heaps. Only then can genuine peace begin. The mountain of the house. Throughout scripture, mountains often symbolize elevated states of consciousness. The house symbolizes the temple. And Paul says, your body is the temple of God. The mountain of the house points toward the elevated awareness where divine presence is realized. But Micah says, even this becomes overgrown. Why? Because the structure was no longer serving truth. It was serving ego. It was serving profit. It was serving power. Anything built upon distortion eventually returns to the ground. Forest in scripture often symbolize untamed consciousness, uncultivated awareness. The mountain that was supposed to be ordered becomes wild again. Why? Because the caretakers abandoned their responsibility. The great pattern of Micah 3. The chapter begins with corrupted leadership. It ends with dismantled structures. This is a pattern found throughout scripture. Not because God enjoys distraction, but because truth eventually exposes everything built upon illusion. The Christ consciousness perspective. This chapter actually prepares us for one of the greatest truths of spiritual awakening. Before resurrection comes crucifixion. Before renewal comes dismantling. Before the new wine comes, the old wineskin often breaks. Before the new temple emerges, the old temple falls. Jesus embodies this pattern repeatedly. Paul embodies it repeatedly. The prophets embody it repeatedly. The inner meaning of the entire chapter. Micah 3 is not fundamentally about ancient rulers. It is about consciousness. The chapter shows what happens when discernment is rejected, when truth is sold, when leadership serves self-interest, ego replaces wisdom, appearance replaces reality. Eventually, the inner city collapses. The false Zion is plowed. The false Jerusalem becomes ruins. The false temple is dismantled, not as punishment, but as preparation, because a field must be plowed before it can receive seed. The chapter is complete. Thanks for being here, and I will see you in the next teaching.